Thanks, Brittany. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right, I'm going to take the screen. I'm going to drive the presentation side of it. Josh and I will both be speaking, everybody. So let's get started. And can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm John Bassett. I'm Executive Vice President and CTO of GSI. Joining me today is Josh Smith. He's our Infrastructure Manager. And together we're going to talk about some cybersecurity things and give you a little bit of feedback on how some of that affects, your JD Edwards system. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about, we'll go very quickly through our introductions and overview. We'll talk about some vulnerabilities that are out there, some of the business impact. We'll talk a little bit about the NIST framework, some maybe even do a little bit of scare tactics. So hopefully we don't frighten you away too hard, but we also want everybody to understand the importance. If you don't already, you probably do. So, but that's definitely part of the business impact. Josh will talk a little bit about some of the planning, some of the vulnerability assessment material that he has. I'll talk to you a little bit about pen testing, and et cetera. And then we'll talk about some things that we've encountered, some hacks that over the past 25 years we've encountered with JD Edwards and what some of the people did about it. So yeah, I'm going to skip these slides because Brittany actually went through most of these. It's a standard part of our presentation where we're at geographically and some of our core competencies. So I'm not going to go into those because she went over it already. And it's just a duplication. So let's talk first about some vulnerabilities that are in the computer industry in general. Josh, do you want to take this one and say hi to everybody? I think maybe we lost Josh.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things where you start with security is really where are you vulnerable? What does your footprint look like? Where do you need to improve things? And so some of the main areas that we look at and that, somebody would need to look at when they're looking at their footprint are physical vulnerabilities. So when we say physical vulnerabilities, what we're talking about is access to your resources. If you're in a data center or if you're in a cloud, if you're on-prem, and if you are, do you have controls in place? Do you use biolocks or card readers? If you're in a data center, do you have man traps? Outside of those kind of things, you also have things from a physical standpoint like human error. People plugging something into the wrong port can cause a breach in security. Things like natural disasters can compromise the physical infrastructure, and that can put you in a vulnerable position. So there's a lot of physical components, and that goes into your data center and your resource planning as well as your overall security plan. We also talk about your operating systems, whether you're on Windows or Linux or Apple. All those systems require patching and updates. All the hardware that attaches to your infrastructure, all of that requires updates. There's software, there's firmware, and all those things are constantly being updated for vulnerabilities and for security flaws. So those are things that we look at.
Josh, I'd like to interject. The operating system patching and database patching can be a challenge for JD Edwards. As many of you have known over the years that you think you're doing the right thing, taking the Windows patches. The next thing you know, things are broken with JDE, and you do your research. Say, well, we didn't certify it on that level. So there's a delicate trade-off there on operating system and database and your middleware patching to make sure that what you apply. Now, the good news is that Oracle is getting better about remaining current and understanding, and they release quarterly patches along with JD Edwards quarterly patches. So I'll let you go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So all those things, those play a big part in your overall plan, and some of this looks like, these first two subjects are really big topics in security, but they're often overlooked because people think security terms, they think of firewalls and malware and those kind of things, but these other components are, they play a big role in your overall security. And then outside of the inherent flaws and the inherent weaknesses of the infrastructure that we all connect to, we've also got directed threats. And so, everybody that's on this webcast and really everybody that's connected to a computer has been targeted in some way. You've got phishing attempts and viruses and malware. You got ransomware is a very big one. Most corporations in some way or another have dealt with denial of service or direct or distributed denial of service. So there's all these threats that there are malicious entities that they act like businesses. They act like corporations, and the only objective they have is to either get paid for the attacks that they direct, or they want to cause problems and just interrupt service. So there's a lot that's out there, right?
Next slide.
Are you?
Yeah. You wanted the next slide?
Did that progress? So some of those directed threats, you've all heard of malware and bots, and those are really common for loss of productivity and also loss of data. I mentioned phishing attacks on the last slide. Phishing is where somebody is trying to get data from you, and they pose as somebody else, and because it looks like it's a valid email, or it looks like it's from a known resource, you'll answer those emails, and before long, you've given up data that or identity that can compromise your security. Denial of service, again, loss of productivity, loss of revenue. These have a financial impact, whether it's a um, direct payment like ransomware, or whether it's just loss of productivity. According to Radware, the average cost of a cyber attack to an enterprise, and when we say enterprise, we're talking about people like Delta or Coca-Cola, Home Depot, large corporations like that. The average cost is over $1 million per incident in 2018, and that's up 52% from what it was in 2017.
That could be devastating to a smaller company.
Yeah, those numbers are ridiculous. And if you're, a company the size of like GSI or a normal SMB, or even mid-sized company, those incidents can be devastating. Those numbers are up from 2017, 52%. The biggest thing is loss of productivity. But then you look at somebody like Marriott or Home Depot, when those businesses have had incidents, those result in a negative customer experience, which it hurts their reputation. It hurts whether or not you want to buy from them, whether you want to book a hotel with them. So the financial impact is significant, and it's going up every year.
How many people heard about yesterday's event where Jeff Bezos received some kind of image from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and next thing you know, he's been hacked. I mean, isn't that unbelievable? He's one of the richest men in the world, and he was subject to a hack. So let's talk a little bit more about those business impacts. Many companies, if you're a public company, are required to meet compliance standards such as HIPAA or PCI. I was just reading, last week that, if you do business in the state of New York or are located in the state of New York, you have more than 50 employees or over $3 million in revenue, you are required now by law to comply with their NIST CSP standards. So if you do business in New York and you weren't aware of that, you got less than 60 days to get compliant. Now, the state of New York isn't going to be able to audit all the companies that are not in compliance. But if you're one to get audited, there's some pretty serious fines. But if you're taking credit card transactions online, you need PCI. If you have HR payroll data, you need or any other human resource type of data, you got to be HIPAA compliant. So the greater the responsibility, the greater the impact. Costs are getting higher to meet the compliance standards, and in the event that you get hit, remediation is more difficult. I've read some stories of some health organizations in the Atlanta area that got hit with ransomware, and they had to choose between paying the fee or not paying the fee, and the negative impact it had on their public image. They just chose to pay it. And that's one of the things when you're doing your plan, you need to think about: are you going to fight or flee? Those are your choices. Maybe it's smarter for you just to pay the fee, but then you might get hit again. That's what a lot of people are finding, is they get hit once and they get hit a second time because they didn't tighten up. And then they get hit a third time because they didn't get tightened up. And at some point in time, you've got to lock things down. And I had one guy about 5 years ago in a cyber session, said, I can just unplug my connection to the internet and my business system can keep running. I'm like, yeah, but what about all of your integrations? How are you gonna handle that nowadays? So you got to think about that. The cost of prevention is always less than remediation. That is true, assuming you've got a good plan. You got to think about lost productivity, litigation, and reputation. I already talked a little bit about that. Will you get sued if you get hit? Are you assessing all of your vendors too, or your subcontractors, not just yourself, but who's supplying you? Are you looking at everything? Remediation planning, put together a plan. What would you do in the event that you got hit, and test it out by all means. Assemble a testing team, and we're going to talk a little more about that a little bit later, but test out the plan. Good backups are critical. If you get hit and you find yourself hit with ransomware, but then you go to a backup and find the ransomware was included in the backup, you might have a little bit of a problem. Keep in mind that DR and business continuity are not necessarily the same thing. Generally speaking, DR is a part of a business continuity plan. So business continuity may take into consideration physical damage as well. A little more on the people side of things, whereas DR might be more system related. And you either have to have the staff to handle it, or you have to contract out the staff if you aren't willing to pay for it. In some cases, it might make sense to outsource it if the staff charge would end up being, if the subcontracting charge is half or a fourth of what it would be to hire, it might make sense. So, but again, prevention is the key. Modern threats are more sophisticated and harder to remediate. One of the things you may find and have seen is that the cyber criminals are finding that it's much easier to get the average human being to trip up and give you credentials to your system than it is to try to hack into a 256-bit encrypted type of system or software. So they're going to try to hit people first. It's easy, right? If you're a hacker and you send out emails to 1,000 people and you get 5 or 10 to click on the link, isn't that a whole lot easier than trying to crack the code of something that's really tough to break? So that's what they're doing right now. Ransomware, massive. Is this slide's yours,
Yeah.
Josh? So I'm gonna let you talk about it.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the biggest things that we've seen that's not necessarily the most prolific, but it's definitely one of the biggest impacts from a financial standpoint is ransomware. And a lot of times, ransomware comes and you don't even know you have it. It'll sit dormant for a while before anything happens. And then often, in other cases, it will be embedded in something that's, maybe included in a legitimate looking email, similar to a phishing attack. But according to ZDNet, the average cost of ransomware for a general mass email threat, like John started to talk about there, is around $12,000. And so that's the kind of threat that really is not directed to you specifically. but it's just part of a much larger email dump. A lot of people get that same email, and for every one that clicks on the wrong link, uh, the cost is around 12,000. And that was Q1 of 2019 that these facts are taken from. And that's up 100% from Q4 of 2018. In that same report, other attacks like Ryuk or BitPaymer, Dharma, those are more directed, and those are more like the corporation type attackers. These are much higher ransoms, and those are averaging about $286,000 per incident. So if you think about that, a directed attack, it's going to be more sophisticated. It's going to look more legitimate. And when you go to when it actually takes place, the cost of getting your data back is over $250,000. If you pay that, and we would always recommend to not pay that fee, but if you pay that, like John mentioned earlier, a lot of times you are vulnerable to be attacked again. So you have to think about other things, how do you remediate if it happens? How do you prevent it from happening? And so that you think about other things like your infrastructure again. What do your backups look like? How often are you taking those? What's your RPO versus RTO plan for business continuity? So there's a lot that goes into that. The planning has to be current and up to date, and you have to have a plan for when these very specific things happen.
I'll take this one since these are kind of my fun things to talk about. Josh and I gave this presentation at Quest Southeast a month ago. And one of the things we did that you can't see here is we brought with us a Pineapple device. And a Pineapple is a Wi-Fi pen testing type tool. It's also very similar to, got a lot of similar tools to what you'd get on Kali Linux. It's designed for the white hatters. The white hatters are hackers that are completely above board. They're not trying to steal from anybody. They're not trying to bring anybody's system down. They're just trying to help people figure out how to be safer. And one of the things this Pineapple device was able to do was a man in the middle. And the man in the middle attack is something that is very easy to do. It's almost impossible for you guys to prevent that. So let's say I go sit at the Hilton, because that's where this was, and there's the Hilton guest Wi-Fi and all the people connected to the Hilton Wi-Fi. Well, guess what? I intercepted that, and I had over 12 people connect to my Pineapple, and there are a lot of things you can do once they connect to it. Now, I didn't do anything with it, but I just wanted to show these people that I caught them. And the middleman people are going to start doing SSL type of attacks, and they're going to try to look at browsing credentials. If you go to anything unencrypted, then and you put your username and password in, we'd have gotten you, we'd have had you. And I scared the people there, and I did that on purpose. And I gave a couple pieces of advice to prevent that. First and foremost is, do not under any circumstances save public Wi-Fi sites in your list of sites. The reason that happens is because you get this big list of public sites, and then your computer starts polling for all of those, and it sends out probes. My little man in the middle box collects those probes and say, aha, look, somebody's looking for Hilton.com. Let's just go ahead and let them in. And then you're stuck. But if you don't save those and you have to re-authenticate every time you try to get to one of those sites, you're going to stop many of those. Also, when you're in a public place, don't try to avoid going to financial. So if you're sitting at the Marriott and you're doing your banking or something like that, you're vulnerable. I do recommend you save your home sites. You know who you are. You've got everything set up inside your home. If you're in your business, as long as you've got a good networking team, that's okay. But Starbucks, Marriott, Chicago ORD Airport, no, not good places. Now you can protect yourself with VPN solutions as well. In many cases, then you're encrypting encrypted traffic and just slowing things down. but it's something you need to weigh. If you're a pharma, you have no choice. You need, or your Department of Defense, get those VPN devices. My sister works for Humana. Her internet power was out. She came over to the house and she brought all of her equipment that was protecting her. Great. I was great to see that. Very smart, intelligent thing. But not every business needs that level of encryption. How important is your data if you're not storing that much? Just be cautious on what you do. And that's the first and foremost thing. Be careful. Some of the common things that people are doing, phishing, unsuspecting victims. I've clicked on a phishing email. I got an email from somebody that I knew. I saw the link, I clicked on it, and I immediately knew, oh my God, this person got hacked, and I clicked on that email. I was worried. I had to go and change all my passwords. It happens to everybody. But you know, more and more there are services like KnowBe4 that will train you to spot some of these things, these suspicious emails. If you're a network manager and you haven't implemented a tool like Proofpoint to prevent as much phishing as possible, then I consider recommend you look into using Proofpoint to prevent phishing emails and impersonating emails. Vishing, I'm getting more and more phone calls to pay money, threatening, calls from the IRS saying if you don't pay up, we're gonna garnish your wages or take your tax money. The IRS doesn't call people, guys. You're going to get every communication via the U.S. mail, and you just need to know that. They're preying on older people, maybe hoping to get an older person that hasn't, doesn't suspect things, but I've made, when it comes to phone calls, and I know this is terrible, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. If I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, don't answer it. If it's somebody important, they'll leave a message. Okay, it might be a little annoying, but at least it's safe. Same thing with smishing. That's where text messages. I probably have gotten 4 of those these weeks. I don't know if you have gotten them. It's just text message designed to get you to click on the links on your phone. So if you don't recognize the number, aren't expecting something from somebody, don't click on it. You just better to be safe than sorry. Better to miss something than to click on something you shouldn't. And I think in this day and age, people are starting to understand that. You say, well, I sent you a text. I'm like, well, sorry, it looked bad. I didn't click on it. Most people are understanding that. So again, it's a lot easier to get unsuspecting people to give away their credentials than to hack into the system. And these are the 3 ways that happens. All right, planning. Josh, I think this is back to you.
Yeah, so of course, one of the first things we want to do is, like John mentioned, we want to have a plan, right? We want to make sure that we know where our footprint is. We want to make sure we understand where we are vulnerable and where we need to strengthen things up. So some of the first things that people think about are your network design and your monitoring. What goes into your network. When we talk about security, I've talked to a lot of businesses that when they talk about security, they think firewall, and that's the first thing and really the only thing that goes into their plan. But security is really, it's comprehensive, it's holistic, and it's not a single appliance. Security takes into account how you connect. If you're using MPLS or VPN or straight internet connections, there's a lot that goes into every layer of your network. So making sure you have a good network design. Make sure you monitor your network end to end. So if you have a lot of endpoints, a lot of remote access, make sure you know who's getting on, how they get on, and when they get off. What is the duration of their connection? Looking at intrusion prevention and intrusion detection. These terms, they haven't gone away, but they sort of get thrown into what we call next generation devices, next generation firewalls, next generation endpoint protection. But those newer devices and newer resources are using intrusion prevention and intrusion detection to find out and correlate events that indicate you do have an intrusion. And in the prevention side, they can look at heuristic behavior and prevent things from happening, just knowing that if this is supposed to be a website and it's supposed to act like a web server, and now it's not acting like a web server, something suspicious is going on, and it'll prevent those connections. So when you're looking at designing your network, think about things that, if they don't specifically say intrusion prevention or intrusion detection, think about things that say next generation, because typically those things involve, those devices and tools involve those two methods of prevention. Vulnerability and pen testing. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but when you have a plan, you have to make sure that it works. And so just like with a disaster recovery plan, you want to make sure that when you fail over, things come up the way you expect. It's the same thing with security. You put in, build the best design, you put in the best equipment, all the processes are in place. Now you have to find a way to test that without actually compromising the data that you just tried to protect. So we do that with vulnerability scanning and vulnerability testing. And then in more sensitive areas, we do actual pen testing. The difference there being that, vulnerability testing looks at where you're weak and where you need to remediate. It doesn't actively try to exploit those things. Penetration testing does everything that vulnerability testing does, but it takes it to that next level, and it actually tries, those tests are actually designed to exploit those vulnerabilities to see what actual data can be compromised, what you can get from there. In the case of cloud environments, some people look at cloud access security brokers, and so that's another thing to think about if you have an environment that's not just on-prem. If you're doing hosting or cloud, then that's something else you can think about. I'll move to the next slide there, John. So,
this one's you.
Yeah,
this one's you too.
If you've been around, infrastructure and network and security for any length of time, you've seen something similar to this. And really the idea here is that, like we were talking about before, you've got a design, you come up with what you think is going to be the best plan for your environment, you deploy that, then you test and monitor with the tools that we're talking about, things like John talked about earlier, and he'll talk a little bit about using teams to do that testing, but having white hacker type testing, vulnerability testing, pen testing, and then monitoring all that. You take those results and you remediate, you improve, and then you put that into a new design. And all that goes around, your risk management, your compliance issues. If you're dealing with credit cards or health information, you've got PCI and HIPAA to think about, and that goes into your IT governance. So that's a cycle. It's not going back to the earlier comment, security is not a tool. It's not a device. It's really an approach and a methodology. So it never really ends, unfortunately, but it's sort of the life cycle of your environment to keep things secure and keep things operational.
Okay, we're getting behind, so we got to move a little faster. I'll take these slides, but they're more for reference, and maybe more falls on the high availability and DR side of what we've been talking about today. Oracle has some sample reference architecture. Now, what I'm showing you does have a cloud focus, but this is good strategy even if you're sitting inside your own data center talking about different fault domains and different sites. There's a security reference and then an architecture reference. I'm just going to buzz through these because this alone could be a 2-hour discussion. I'm going to include them for your reference. High availability, single availability domain. This in DR has a single region, but multiple availability domains. This is more of an HA solution than a DR solution, although HA in many cases is DR. We don't always make that assumption. And then here we have a high availability multi-region, which is definitely for DR purposes. We're used to including them for reference so that you can look back if you want to see what Oracle is recommending for J.D. Edwards systems. I wanted to just talk, Josh mentioned intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and they are not exactly the same thing and need to somewhat understand the difference. And a lot of companies will do intrusion detection for you. And that is look at your existing traffic and look for signs that you're being hit. It's not exactly prevention, but it's like what's happening now. You know, if your system's running dog slow, or you under a denial of service hit or something like that, your IDS might pick it up. But the intrusion prevention falls in the same category, but it's designed more in line with protecting you up front. Keep your, you know, think of it as your firewall, maybe your next gen firewall. Keep the outside world and an internal network, you know, proactively denying the bad guys from hitting your system. So these two kind of go hand in hand. If you've got a good IPS system, maybe your IDS system can be a little less, but don't forget there might be holes in your IPS, so you might have your IDS there to try to help you figure it out. And this is where some of the smart guys can help you, and we'll talk about who some of the smart guys are. And you can see there's a little bit of overlap here. IPS is a control system, IDS are detection and monitoring systems, and that's the thing to keep in mind. So with that said, we wanted to at least distinguish for you the difference between a vulnerability assessment, a penetration test, and rating services. Some people think they're the same. You get with a company like BitSite or something like that, and they're more of a rating service. They go in, they keep history on a whole bunch of people and tell you where you've had holes. That's great and all that, but they're not actually trying to break into your system. They're just looking for common vulnerabilities and give you a rating based on that. And they one of the things you can do, you could use the rating services or maybe some other tools like Rapid Fire, and Josh is going to talk a little bit about that, where you can do a detailed vulnerability assessment that helps you maybe from the inside as well as the outside, whereas the rating services are more of an outside-in type of service. So it's basically to say, where are, you know, what holes do you have that we know about, or that we know are holes? A penetration testing service, you know, it's a software tool. It's, you know, it's as much a software tool as it is a team of people, and they are skilled and designed to break into your system. They have Kali Linux sitting on their desktop. They have pineapples. They have all kinds of tools designed to use their brains and their skills and their software to get into your system and break your system. You know, like a rating service might not, or a vulnerability service might not be able to see if you're going to be subject to a denial of service attack. There's some vulnerabilities are, but the pen testers are actually going to try a DOS and DDoS and try to break your system. So we wanted to show you the three categories and that they are different. So here you go, Josh. This is yours.
Thanks. So as we're talking about pen testing and vulnerability testing, you know, the idea here is that you're going to get a rating. You're going to prioritize the vulnerabilities, and you're going to look at the overall environment to do so. So these are just some examples, things to look for. In this case, you know, something like an account lockout. It's a pretty easy thing to configure, but it's also a very, you know, pretty serious thing. So, you know, that would be a higher rating. And again, this is just an example of something that, you know, goes along with a vulnerability assessment. This is not typical of a pen test, but it may be in a vulnerability assessment. It may be part of included in a rating system. I'm gonna hit the next one there, John.
Sorry, sidetracked.
That's
there you go.
And so those go into an overall score, right? So what you saw on that last page was one topic. And so when you think about all the components that go into your security, all the different facets of your network, whether you're talking about Active Directory or Linux, and you know, all these different pieces have vulnerabilities. And so as you look through those, you're going to have a rating for each of those, and some of those may be higher or lower rated, or higher or lower priority based on, you know, what the impact may be. And so you're going to get an overall score, and you have to take that with a grain of salt, because and it's good to have somebody that understands what those numbers mean, because it's all relative, right? So risk versus vulnerability and what the impact may be. So those things are all taken into account and go into what you're going to do for a remediation plan. Next slide. When you look at the entire picture, this is just another example of what that analysis may look like. Some people use numbers to give you a rating. Some people, do the red, green, yellow, and in this case, we're looking at, sort of the report card for this particular network. All of these are real-world examples that we've captured, and so there's a little bit of redaction there as far as the names of servers and that kind of thing. But these are examples of what you can expect from a vulnerability or a risk and rating assessment.
All right, we're running low on time, so I'm going to go through real quick. This is the bad pyramid: build, attack, defend, and this just basically defines the type of people that can help you with your system. Red teams are the attackers; they're the kind of the fun people. They get to be the pen testers, try to break in. Blue team are the defenders, trying to keep the red team from getting in. The yellow team is the group of people that built the system to begin with. And you can see from the various colors, and you can get a copy of this webcast, and we've got definitions on the next few pages of what these do. They all have to talk to each other. And sometimes smaller companies, these people might all be the same people. You might also not have all the skills. Like you might have the defenders, but you might not have the attackers. So you can subcontract any piece out that you may or may not have, depending upon the size of your company. And all of these folks need to talk. Yellow needs to talk to red, and that's the orange team. Builder changes based on attacker knowledge, etc. And this is the overall scoop of how you would get through the day. Whoops, what happened here? My slides are not advancing properly. So I'm not going to go into all these. We're running low on time. Things you can read about when you get to it. So let's talk a little bit about some vulnerabilities that we've seen on JD Edwards, just to give you some perspective if you've not seen it. Might be why you've all been here. JD Edwards now has SSL all the way through. In fact, if you're on a lot of the cloud solutions, the load balancers require it to be sitting at all layers. It used to be places would just put the SSL on their load balancer, an F5 or something like that. But there are hacks, especially the SSL hack, that counts on people not protecting the back end. So you might have the front end to your load balancer as SSL, but the SSL device talking to your web server unencrypted. Guess what? That gives some people the keys to the castle. EnterpriseOne now offers site keys all the way, and it's a little bit easier than it was maybe 10 years ago to get these to work. You don't have to always do signed certificates. You could do some unsigned certificates or self-signed certificates for maybe internal communications. Not all companies allow that. But if it gets you encryption at all layers, that's you want to at least do that. If you don't want to pay for all of the encryption, the SSL certificates, maybe the internal ones you could do yourself signed. VPN and IPsec, very secure solutions. Duo with multi-factor authentication is fantastic. So even if the hackers get your credentials, and even if they are smart enough to decrypt the secure and traffic, if you don't have that, if you don't have the MFA authentication, they're still not going to get it. So you could still give somebody all of the software, all of your credentials, accidentally, and without the token, you're done. Kaseya or Bastion, GSI has implemented Kaseya with our clients. It's a hardened way to get into a system with monitoring. That's the really cool thing. You can see who's getting into your system. It's agent-based, highly secure, remote way to get in. If your VPN solution becomes difficult. MPLS, of course, is site-to-site communication, higher speed. You still need to be thinking about being hijacked, and if you're like a pharma or something like that, you need to be thinking about firewalls on each side and maybe whitelisting IP-to-IP communication to try to help prevent some of the hackers, et cetera. So some of the JD hacks, that we've stumbled across, and these are the biggies. Network shares, right? That's been a baddie. Two of our clients in 2017 got hacked via their network file shares. One person had to restore from backup. They got hit with ransomware. Another got their backups working and all that, but and what is out on shares, media objects, print queues, but you know what? Oracle has changed the code for JDE to allow putting media object and print queue files in the database, and it might be a good idea for you to think about it if you're on one of the newer tools releases to get rid of the file shares if you think that's a problem. RDP sessions, yeah, it's not good. Azure has something called a just-in-time port, so you know it's hidden unless you're trying to access it, and then it's open while you're on it. So there's a period of time where it's open, but at least while you're not connecting to it, it's not sitting there available. I set up a server in Azure a couple of months ago, and before I even had Windows installed, it was already being hit with denial of service attacks. I couldn't believe that fast that I was being hit. Didn't even have time to get the OS finished. Did not have the SentinelOne antivirus on it in time. Middleware. This was a bear. Early 2019, there were some major flaws found. If you'd left your WebLogic console open, you get hit with Bitcoin miner. So you might want to. And one of our clients got hit like that. We had it in one of our labs. We had not patched it in time. We didn't care too much about our lab because it was an older lab, and you know, there was no business data on it. There was nothing for us, but we hurried up and patched it. It was bad to have a Bitcoin miner sitting on your system, but several clients did too. Another thing, JD Edwards itself has, you might want to consider a lockout all grant back in strategy. You know, maybe consider using all out or Q software for segregation of duties and reporting. That's good advice if you're leaving everything open. And I'll talk about a couple more examples here. I talked about the network shares, Bitcoin mining. We did have a client a few years back. I won't tell you where it is. This is a true story. The accounting clerk created, improved, and dispersed checks, and before they caught her, she had stole $750,000 from the company. So that is actually a legitimate client hit. Ransomware hit another JDE user. They were down for 5 days. Remarkably, the bottom one, the second one, were within maybe 10 miles of each other. It was introduced via an email. It was sophisticated enough to learn the various network credentials and call for download of additional code. It was a recent variant that they were unprepared for it, and it moved rapidly through every server that it could. That is why GSI recommends next-gen type of programs. SentinelOne is a next-gen antivirus. It doesn't just look for common vulnerabilities, also known as CVEs. It looks for suspicious activity. It's like, okay, this next attack isn't something that we know about, but it looks bad. And the next-gen firewalls, the next-gen antivirus, the next-gen pen testing tools look for that. So when you're doing your due diligence, think of the word next-gen. A couple things that GSI has done in addition to SentinelOne, we also purchased Cisco Umbrella. And Cisco Umbrella basically makes the assumption that if DNS can't look something up, then you're going to be okay. So it rolls everything under a protected DNS. Now that's great if everything's named, but it doesn't protect against everything. There's still some IP hacks that could be had, but it definitely is a good solution, and will I've noticed that if I accidentally go to a site I'm not supposed to, click on something, it'll warn me, and that's been very useful to us as well. Whew. Keep calm. I know after everything we said, maybe that's not the easiest thing to do, but that's the best thing you can do. If you've got a plan, document it, dig it out, relax, dig the plan out, start working the plan, assign duties to people. So here's some of our recommendations. And these aren't just our recommendations either. Just so you understand, this picture, this wheel is the NIST cybersecurity framework, but get a third-party assessment. GSI does cloud value assessments and JDE security assessments as well. Make sure your endpoints are protected with next-gen solutions. Protect your perimeter, firewall, again, next generation. Whitelist your traffic. If you only want traffic to go from server A to server B, don't let server C get to it. Lock it down with a whitelist. Email, Proofpoint is really good at taking out impersonation and definitely phishing. Network segmentation, you can go to the extreme on that. The network examples that I provided with you are some recommendations coming from Oracle on how to properly segment a JDE system. Take a look at them. Encrypt everything, absolutely a must. Even internally, we advise against doing it. Maybe use a self-signed certificate to save some money. VPN for remote access, with multi-factor authentication is critical. Consider doing pen testing and the vulnerability testing and rating services. Test your backups and DR process. Make sure that you can restore your backups and that they're not infected too. And the big one, educate your people. GSI uses Know Before. Know Before, basically we schedule training for people every so often. If you click on a link you're not supposed to, that gets sent out because they send out exercises to try to catch people to do the wrong thing. If you fail one of those, you get some additional education. Very useful. GSI's click percentages dropped almost 25% when we started implementing it. So I guess that's all I have. Josh, do you have anything to add, or should we turn this over to the?
So we'll let Brittany go through a couple of the next things here that are upcoming, but and then I'll wrap up when she's done here.
All right, Brittany.
Yep, I'm here. Give me 1 second while I get my screen to share. All right. Can you see my screen, John?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you to Josh and John. I'm going to cover a few follow-up items and move on to our question and answer section. Our webcast today is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcasts on JD Edwards. You can see our upcoming webcast on the screen here. You can also check out our ERP Talk, which is our problem-solving forum where you can get your JD Edwards and other enterprise application questions answered. Stay connected with us on social media. All of our handles are currently listed on the screen. You can also see our most up-to-date posts on webcast events, industry insights, and so much more. GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the JD Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcast, monthly newsletter called GSI Insider, online resource center where you can access our on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc., and on-site and virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or create an account to access our resource center, go to getgsi.com, go to resources and events on the main menu, select JD Edwards, and then you can select the appropriate link. Okay, now we're into our question and answer section. And we do actually have questions that came in, and I'm going to have Josh take over from here.
Yeah, before we get into the questions, just one more thing is, as we talked about services that GSI provides, and we do provide cybersecurity vulnerability assessments. Right now, this slide did not get put into the deck as well. I'm kind of going out of order here, but a typical vulnerability assessment, a standard vulnerability assessment, I should say, normally is a $39.95 value, and we're doing that right now for everybody that's on the workshop. we're doing this for $29.95, and that's valid for 14 days from today's date. And what that includes is an internal vulnerability scan, external vulnerability scan, written policy review, the assessment analysis. So as we do the scan, our engineers will evaluate and give feedback, prioritization, and remediation planning. That will come out in a personalized report, as well as a remediation plan to address anything that's found. All right. So I was going through the questions. One of the questions was from Dixie. Dixie asked if we're going to talk about Oracle's quarterly critical patches issued on January 14th. Sorry, the questions were at the end here, so sorry I missed that now. But John, is that something that you can speak to at all?
Yeah, that wasn't what we addressed it briefly, but it wasn't a topic we were going to go into in detail on this session, because it depends on which area. I mentioned that it's a touchy subject because Oracle sends out their critical patches, but the question of whether or not it breaks JDE has historically been an issue. Supposedly that's not the case, but our experience has showed us to validate the certifications online, and that's what I do. When I see the quarterly patches and I look at them, I go online, I go to the certifications, and I make sure the patch set is updated. But that really wasn't the intent of today's session.
Okay. So Lonnie asked if you recommend not paying the ransom for ransomware attacks, what do we recommend that you do? The answer is really have a good DR plan and have a good backup with a reasonable RTO and RPO for your business objectives. John mentioned tools that we put in place, like Cisco Umbrella. Those kind of tools that are sort of a proxy DNS. They may help because a lot of malware and ransomware, those are designed to make a callback to a specific entity, and so if those are known or malicious, a lot of times those will be caught and prevented by something like Cisco Umbrella. We're getting low on time. I'm going to hit these last two questions really quick. We've got one more question from Dixie. Or two more. Well, one question, one comment. How critical is it to update Java? John, you want to take that one?
Oh, yeah, good question. Java is, in my opinion, should be treated like middleware. There are vulnerabilities. The 32-bit version has been hacked. Oracle, in fact, going forward, will not be producing the 32-bit version. You'll have, at some point in time, you'll have to go to the 64-bit version, which is a little safer, but treat it like middleware. It does have vulnerabilities. It does get hacked, and we haven't personally seen any. Like WebLogic, we definitely have seen some. Network shares, we have seen it. We have not seen any Java hacks inside of the JD Edwards, but I would treat it like middleware. Update it, stay up to date, just like you would your operating system.
Thanks, John. So we're out of time here. We want to make sure everybody gets back to their day and not take too much more. We did have a few more questions, but I didn't get to. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us and reach out to us directly. We'll be glad to answer any questions and help you in any way we can on your own security planning.
Sorry we went a little long, folks. Apologize for that.
Thank you, Josh and John.
Thank you.
As a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit. You'll be receiving a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. After today's webcast, we'll do a drawing for a $25 Amazon gift card. Anyone that attended the entire webcast will be eligible. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact us, and we thank you again for attending our presentation.